Okay, we have a raised hand already. Has anyone picked up on that? 2 participants have raised their hands. Myself included. Lower that. Right, so it's 7 o'clock. Do we wait for a few more to join, and then we start at about a few minutes time?
Yes, I suspect we can give ourselves about maybe 3 or so more minutes.
Okay, good, okay. Hello, good evening.
Hello, good evening.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Sorry, I needed to rush out to do something.
No problem at all, no problem. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. We are just waiting a few more minutes before we just get started. We can see we're waiting for a few more to join, and then we will start the program. Thank you very much. Okay, we now have about 72 people on board, so we will start the program. Hello, good evening, good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us. on our second webinar in this series on the dynamics of unhealthy relationships. My name is Samantha Prosser. I'm a member of the All Girls Association Webinar Committee, and I'm also the president of the OGA UK and Ireland. On behalf of Wesley Girls, All Girls Association, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all. Some of you would have joined us last week, and for others, this may be your first session with us. Either way, we are happy for you, to have you here with us. I'm co-hosting with Dr. Bertha Aye, who is the chairman of the webinar committee. Dr. Aye, please say hello.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good. Thank you, Dr. Bertha. So we got off to a good start last Sunday with the session on red flags, and that went very, very well. With our speakers, we had the very Reverend Ama Afoble, we had Dr. Foster Naniwoto, and Mr. Adolf Ewukubekwe, who is also here with us again today on the panel. And they all did a tremendous job to set this off. So for those who missed last week, we will post the YouTube link for the recording in the chat. So you can pick that up. For this session, we will be building on last week to discuss how to get help when you find yourself in an unhealthy relationship. There are many, many questions. What will you do? Who do you go to? If all else has failed, how do you exit? And if there's been an escalation, then how do you exit safely? What are the legal frameworks around that? So to tackle these and much more, we're pleased to have our three speakers, Dr. Angela Dramina Abuaji, who's a lawyer, pastor, and a counselor, Mr. Ewukubekwe, Adolf Ewukubekwe, who's a clinical psychologist and a lecturer, and the Honorable Diana Asunaba Dapa, who's the Deputy Minister, the Office of the Attorney General and Ministry of Justice. The format will be the same as before. We will introduce each speaker, who will give their presentation, and then we will take a brief question and answer for about 5 minutes before moving on to the next speaker. Once all the speakers have completed the presentations, then we will start we'll open up the Q&A. So just a quick sort of house rules. Please note it's a webinar, and because of that, we're unable to take live questions as you would usually do in other chats. So we cannot take via audio or video. We can't take questions, but so use the Q&A facility or the chat facility. We'll try and get through as many of the questions as possible. If you use the raise hand facility, which is right at the bottom on the chat, please do so. Then someone on the team will communicate directly with you via the chat to find out if you need to speak, and if you do, then we can arrange that. Also available to help with questions and some of our other speakers who are not on the panel. We have Professor Efwa Hesse, who is the immediate past president of the All Girls Association. She's a medical doctor, a marriage counselor, and a mentor. We have Dr. Jifa Atta, clinical psychologist and lecturer. As others join, we will let you know who else is on board, but these are the two that I've seen so far showing up. So I will now introduce to you Dr. Angela Dramina Abuaji. Angela Dramina Abuaji, PhD, is a lawyer and the executive director of the Ark Foundation Ghana, a Christian mission NGO, which established the first domestic violence shelter in Ghana in 1999. She was called to the Ghana Bar as a barrister and solicitor in 1989. She also has a master's in law degree from the Georgetown University Law Center in Washington in 1995. She pursued her theological studies at Akrofi Christaler Institute for Theology, Mission and Culture in Ghana, where she received a Master's of the Arts degree in 2006, a Master's of Theology degree in 2013, and a Doctor of Philosophy degree in 2018. She has received a number of awards, including the Micah Award in Los Angeles, USA, a Millennium Excellence Award for Women's Empowerment, and the Martin Luther King Jr. Award for Social Justice in Ghana. Angela is also a conference speaker, a consultant, trainer, and a registered counselor. A licensed minister of the International Central Gospel Church, ICGC, her passion is to draw attention of the church to its core mandates of evangelism, Christian discipleship, pastoral care, and social action. Angela is married to Kwame, an international public servant. They have 4 grown-up children and 2 lovely grandchildren. Dr. Angela Dramina Abuaji, thank you so much for joining us and welcome. You now have the floor.
Thank you very much, Samantha. I'm glad to be here this evening. Good evening to everybody. I hope that you can all hear me loud and clear from Ghana. So I'm going to share my screen. Give me just a little time. Okay. There you go. All right. So thank you once again, Wesley Girls High School, Old Girls Association, for inviting me to be part of this. Thank you. I should have worn my Holy Child School Old Girls clothes, but that's okay. I'm just looking at seeking help in unhealthy relationships. And last week was very exciting. I have done this work for quite a while, but anytime I hear people talking about it, you know, it comes back fresh again. It's as though every case is new. And yes, there are unhealthy relationships because we all do things from time to time that undermine the health of our relationships. Some of these things are stupid, selfish, senseless attitudes or behavior that, you know, for some reason or the other we engage in. But good thing is that most of these things can be worked on. They can be corrected, forgiven, they can be resolved. We move on, hopefully, as better people. When we think unhealthy, therefore, we must also place a check on ourselves and not just on the other person. But if it's the other person, we must not behave like ostriches. We need to confront whatever issues there are, because when you see a pattern, the likelihood is that it's going downhill and it might degenerate. So the obvious stress in this webinar is unhealthy, as in toxic relationships. This is the part where it's not just a one-off behavior, you know, being silly once in a while, but actually you're seeing a pattern of usually coercive, intimidatory, manipulative, disrespectful, abusive attitudes, behaviors, and actions. And I'm saying this because sometimes you need to know you are in the place where you can call your relationship unhealthy. If you're not able to identify that, then it means that, you know, we have another thing to think about. It's interesting to note that, for example, the latest survey by the GLSS in Ghana, Ghana Living Standards, I think, can't remember the exact year, but it's not too long ago, says that about 60% of women who are battered actually believe that their partners, their husbands are right in battering them. So I'm saying this because there are people who do not even know when their relationships have become toxic. And it's important for you to identify that. So I'll start with the dating courtship relationship before you say I do. When it becomes unhealthy, how do you know? Or when it is unhealthy, how do you know? When I'm done with the dating courtship relationship, then we'll look at marriage. But first of all, establish these patterns. It's very important. When you're dating somebody and courtship with somebody and you see patterns of infidelity, you go out and the person is looking at other people, you know, considering that, and you're seeing funny things, secretive things that they don't want to explain and so on. It's a pattern. When you see that pattern, be concerned. Where there's cruelty, abuse, even the first time, that you don't even need a pattern for, you know, that's something that should really make you aware. Your hackles have to go up. When it becomes a pattern, then definitely you are in the wrong, you are in the wrong type of, you are in an unhealthy place, you are in a toxic relationship. Disrespect, dishonor towards you and others. It's something that if you see a pattern of that, or someone who treats you consistently like you are their servant, that's something that should let your hackles go up. You see pride, arrogance, bossiness, controlling behavior, manipulation, or somebody who keeps denigrating your aspirations and your dreams. Anytime you say, look, I aspire to be the biggest aeronautical engineer in Africa, the person says, well, what do you think you are? also kind of thing. Huh? And it's a pattern. You must know that you are in an unhealthy place. Objectification. I meet so many young people, especially who are courting and dating, and they're being pressurized for sex. Okay, if you don't have sex with me, it means you don't love me, or pressure to get pregnant. Okay, if I don't impregnate you, I can't show you to my mother or my father. It's a demand from the family, those kinds of things. Deep-seated stinginess, no contribution, no chop. The person doesn't show any respect towards when you go out or you have to contribute to something, and it becomes a pattern. You ignore these things to your own peril when you are dating or courting. I know last week, many more of these red flags were raised, but these are things that I see a lot where I work. And that's why I brought it up, because you need to know you are in that place. You need to shine your eye. Don't ignore them at your own peril. When you are dating and you see these things, or you're in courtship, speak to other people. Am I seeing what I'm seeing? Yes, I seem to be seeing it, but are you seeing it too? And allow other good people in your life to speak to you about that. The unfortunate thing with especially women, young women, unfortunately, and I found this through research also, is that when they think they are in love, they are almost blinded. Okay, somebody says, don't get blind with love. Don't fall in love, walk in love, because if you fall, you are blind. And that's what happens. So allow good people to speak into your life about what they're seeing. You have good friends and they're saying, look, what we see about this person is not good enough. We see that the person keeps, flipping your phone, asking you where you've been and where, all those things. I don't think it's very good. Listen to them. Most of the times people close their eyes and close their ears. Drawing your dating partner's attention to this pattern of behavior is a first step towards seeking help. And consider their response very carefully. If they are willing to go through a process of work to change their behavior, and remember that change is on them, not on you. You can't change them. They have to take responsibility to work towards change. Then be patient, but see to it that the change process happens. It is a process and it is work, and they probably need somebody to help them with it. If nothing ain't happening, err on the side of caution. I tell you again, shine your eyes. If nothing ain't happening, check out. It's not the end of the world. You're in a dating courtship relationship. If nothing ain't happening in terms of the process of change, please check out. However, if there have been acts of abuse or harm, cruelty, exercise your options for reporting to the agencies that are available or seeking counseling, etc. Here, I'm talking about when it's not just about behavior, attitude, or some actions that have not actually reached the point of being abusive. If they become abusive, you can exercise your options of seeking help from law enforcement agencies or seeking counseling or health services and so on and so forth. So this would go for what I'm saying about dating and courtship relationships. The most important thing is to establish the patterns and advise yourself accordingly. Now, when you have said, I do, when the marriage is on and you see that it has become unhealthy, I'm not going into the red flags because last week we discussed these things at length. But in my experience, what I'll say is this: whenever the two in the marriage, when they make up their minds that they both want a resolution at anything that's happening and they work at it together, 90%, over 90% chance it will work. Whether they are talking through it or using mediation, counseling, accountability exercises, people working with them or whatever it is. If the two of them decide that they want help for either person's behavior or both of them, 90% over 90, it will work. But in toxic relationships, sadly, often one wants it to work very much. One of them is the one who is working all the time to make it work. The other doesn't care two hoots. This is where a toxic pattern of behavior has been established, and without strong intervention, it doesn't stop. Last week, Adolf talked about the cycle of abuse, and that's what I'm saying. A pattern of behavior that's cyclical. Without strong intervention, it doesn't stop. In fact, it degenerates. And one thing I want to also make mention of, because it came up last week, but I thought it needed some work, and I know Adolf will pick it up when I mention it, so I won't go into detail, is that we need to understand that common marital or household conflicts are not the same as abusive patterns of behavior. Common arguments in our households and our marriages are not the same as when abuse is happening. I'll give you a quick example. If I'm arguing with my husband and he says the wall is white and I say, no, it's blue, or I want to take my child to Kodobeda Secondary School, he says, no, I want the child to go to Sradebedunja Secondary School, and we are arguing about this. We can argue for 2 hours. The moment I say, you stupid man, if you don't stop arguing with me, you will see how I will insult you. There's no longer an argument. I have stepped into abuse. I am actually denigrating him, rubbing his face in the mud, treating him as less than, less of a person than I am. The same way, if he says something like, if you don't shut up, I will slap you. There's no argument anymore. This week traveled from common household marital conflict into an abusive situation. And that's something that we need to understand very clearly, because often for those who help, we are not able to put the lines in between these two things, and we use the same approaches. The same approaches do not work. We don't have a lot of time to get into all of that, but I hope that Adolf will pick it up from there, and also we will have a better understanding. So one thing I've also noticed, and here I'm going to put on my pastor's hat, okay? I can never do without that hat, especially in where I work. Jesus's model works still for unhealthy situations, particularly the ones that have not degenerated. But even for those that are degenerating, this model still works, because it's very interesting how he puts it in Matthew 18:15-17. And for my Christian brothers and sisters, yes, if you are not, it can still help you. He says, if another person, another believer, your brother, your sister, your spouse, your friend, your fiancé, I just expanded, offends you, sins against you, go to them privately and point out the offense. That's how we usually start when we are seeking help for something to change. If that person listens and confesses it, which means acknowledges, accepts, genuinely repents, and wants to turn from it, you have won that person back. It means that if it happens and you're able to approach the person and the person genuinely wants change and works towards it, then we are back together, we are good. But if you are unsuccessful, and in other translations it says, if he does not listen, take 1 or 2 others with you to that person again, so everything you say may be confirmed by 2 or 3 witnesses. This is where you are seeking informal interventions to establish veracity, to probably do mediation, arbitration, even couples counseling. You are involving other people in the situation. If that person still refuses to listen, take your case to the church. That means get institutional intervention, even though in this context, he speaks specifically about the church, which also presupposes that as Christians, here I'm addressing Christians of the church, the master expects us to do interventions, and to do interventions that bring healing, restoration, and recovery. Then, if you won't accept the church's decision, refuses to listen even to the church, treat that person as a pagan or a corrupt tax collector. This is the New Living Translation, Bible. A corrupt tax collector. What would that mean? Simply, it means let them be. Live your life. Mind your own business. Walk in such a way or work in such a way that they would not affect you and hurt you and continue to harm you. You may hold them no ill will. You won't have active malice against them or no passive malice. You won't do them bad, or you may do them good, pray for them, forgive them, but make sure that you are cutting off their ability to harm you. And this may include taking action to protect yourself from that offensive behavior. And so I still say and maintain that this model still works. And often many people actually go through this kind of model, but we don't do it with intentionality, with the sense that this is what we are actually seeking all the way till we get what we are looking for either to resolve the issue or to find a way of separating ourselves so that it does not continue to harm or to hurt us. So this will be my last slide, actually. Informal or formal or both. There are several ways of seeking help. And for those that are in toxic relationships that need help, you would find that there are the informal approaches or the informal ways of doing it, then the formal ways, and sometimes people mix it. And then you also find that there are issues with both formal and informal. And I think Hadol spoke a bit about that last week as well. So informal, there are personal approaches, like we usually do. When things are happening, we want to try and see whether we can resolve it ourselves, in whatever ways we can. They are the personal approaches. Then, as for Ghana, even if your house is burning and you are calling fire service, you are also calling the pastor. We are so notoriously religious that this is what we usually do. Most people will approach their religious leader to intervene in these kinds of things. And that is why a dangerously insensitive pastor can do a lot of harm. And that's why it is important for pastors to get trained, not just pastors, but other religious leaders as well. So we ask them for intervention, tell it to the church. And therefore, if the church doesn't know what to do, what will you do? Or we ask respected people to come into the picture. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Because there are times when in toxic relationships, the one who is producing all the toxicity usually would not want to speak with anybody anymore. Okay, they just cut themselves off and they don't want people to reach them. But usually this is what we do. Friends, even for your own sanity, family to intervene, and then self-help, where you just try to find ways in which, you can get well yourself. You can live your life yourself, okay? So these things happen. With family, it's interesting. I think last week we heard that family can be a place of healing, but it can also be a place of hurting. And often with these informal approaches, if they don't understand the issues and they don't demand accountability from the one who is at fault, nothing happens. They will probably send you back into the same situation, and then things go from bad to worse. Okay, so if you have people who demand accountability, and I've seen some before, let me give you a very short example before I leave. There was this lady who had married just 2-3 years, and there was a lot of violence happening already. So one day she runs home. And this lady has 3 brothers. They see their sister crying, battered, bruised, and they just walk to her home, her marital home, knock on the door. They find this young man who's been beating their sister, and they lift him up like that and say, if you ever dare touch our sister. Now that was a strong family intervention. Since the last time, I haven't heard anything has happened again. She went home safely. And I'm not saying that this is the way people should go. I don't promote, unlawful means of, resolving things. But I'm just saying that they made him understand that you have to be accountable for your behavior. We are not going to let you go away with this. We are not going to say, oh, this is the way marriage is. Oh, come, let's drink chicken soup and pray and, go. No, we have to make you accountable. Other people will give you up to the police. My own brothers know that they can't treat their wives anyway, because I will give them up if I have to. And that is where family will tell you that you can't do certain things and survive in this family. And that's important. Okay, then there are the formal methods where you seek medical help, depending on what's happening, psychological help, mental health help, going together, social services, depending on what is happening again, judicial means, using the court processes, legal aid organizations, using law enforcement like the police, and then CSOs, NGOs, CBOs, and FBOs, faith-based organizations that offer a whole range of socio-economic services, and then those that also offer shelter services like we do. And you can use any one of these systems. Again, it depends on their capacity, their training, and all of that. What limits us from seeking help? Sometimes we place limitations on ourselves. Can I do this? Who will believe me? Who will take up my case? Sometimes we place limitations on ourselves. Sometimes it's the things that have gone into our heads. If it's somebody things like the cultural notions. Sometimes it's the religious interpretations we place on, oh, so if I go and tell somebody this is what my husband is doing, will I not be betraying him? Am I forgiving him? I'm supposed to forgive. You know, all of these things go on in people's minds, and they limit our ability to seek help. Ignorance or insensitivity of the helper, and sometimes institutional know-how and capacity deficiencies. All of these undermine our help seeking. However, it's better for you to seek help than to do until you bend your head and you don't raise it ever again. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Angela Damna-Boaje. That was an excellent presentation. And so at this time, we are going to allow 5 minutes for questions, but I don't see any questions in the chat room. All right, I see one question. It says, Giptemisa is asking, when does divorce become an option? And just before that question, one of the examples you gave that quickly come to mind is one case that happened here in Florida concerning a Ghanaian couple who the man was a pastor, and I believe the day before the woman was shot, her brother had gone in strongly to warn the husband to put his life together, and the woman was begging and saying, "Oh, Pacho, just don't report him to the police, just leave him alone." And the next day he threatened to kill her and actually did. So I think that's an example of family intervention. But that's a question that has come up that says, when does divorce become an option?
Well, that's a good question, and it will take quite a bit of time to answer, but let me just say this. Divorce is better than death. That's not to promote easy divorces. There are too many easy divorces going on. And so I'm very careful in saying what I'm saying. The people do not want to try, and that's not what I'm asking about. We're talking about where you have exhausted the options and when you have also reached out for safety. Now, I'll go back to what I know best, the Bible. When King Herod was threatening baby Jesus, God did not say anything but to Joseph, but take the baby and flee with him and the mother until I deal with this person, okay? Until I use whatever there is to solve this problem, don't come back. And sometimes it is important for people to take the option to flee. However you would describe that, separation, divorce, whatever, if you will flee and keep your life, do so. So that's the shortest answer I can give for now to this question.
Okay. And there are two questions that can really be combined into one. The rest, I think, would can come to the next session. Someone said, Angela, that was a brilliant presentation. Well done. This one, I think, will tie. Says, should the church not preach more against domestic abuse? And what happens when the abuser is a pastor or well-respected and highly revered person in the ministry? And I think the next one was about, I didn't hear anything about finances that can lead to unhealthy relationships, but maybe you can address the church preaching about domestic abuse and also
so right, yes, it doesn't matter who it is who is committing the abuse, whether the person is a pastor, a revered pastor, or a bishop pastor, or whatever pastor. The most important thing is that the person is doing the wrong thing, probably engaging in criminal acts, and you still need to take those actions that are necessary to take. In fact, some of the most horrible stories I have of abuse and very coercive and manipulative situations, even when there's no physical abuse, comes from a highly, quote unquote, religious homes. And I think we need to take this seriously. The church has to take this seriously. I can't say that enough. In times past, we've done a lot of work with churches, but there are many, many, many churches. How far can you go? We can only continue to do the best that we can do.
All right. Well, thank you very much. That was an excellent and passionate presentation. We really appreciate that. And so I'm going to introduce our next speaker. I introduced him last week, and I will be very brief. Mr. Adolf Ewukuba-Quain is a national coordinator of the Coalition on Domestic Violence Legislation in Ghana. He's also a lecturer in clinical and developmental psychology at the Methodist University College, Ghana. He holds a postgraduate degree in psychology from the University of Ghana, as well as a diploma in transitional justice from the International Center for Transitional Justice and Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, both in Cape Town, South Africa. Mr. Ewukuba-Quain has considerable experience in working with survivors of gender-based violence, having worked several years as a clinical psychologist and gender-based violence specialist at the Women and Juvenile Unit, WAJU, now Domestic Violence and Victim Support Unit of the Ghana Police Service in Accra, as well as with the Women's Initiative for Self-Empowerment, or WISE. He is also worked with the Federation of International Women's Lawyers, or FIDA. He has worked as a trainer in counseling for the Gender Studies and Human Rights Documentation Center's Chin Chin Project, the ARC Foundation Ghana, and also the Ghana Police Service. Mr. Ewukuba-Quain served as a counselor at the National Reconciliation Commission and victim support volunteer with the Ghana Center for Democratic Development, CDD, working with both victims and alleged perpetrators of human rights abuse during Ghana's National Reconciliation Exercise. In collaboration with the ARC Foundation Ghana, he runs the Center for Trauma Relief and Prevention, CTRAP, where he oversees the provision of trauma-informed intervention for survivors of gender-based violence and other traumatic experiences. Adolf is married to Abba, and together they are blessed with 3 lovely boys, Papayao, Kwejo, and Kofi Ewukuba-Quain. Please help me welcome Mr. Adolf and thank him also for presenting for the 2nd week in a row. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Betha, and good evening to all of you. And I'm very happy to be here again this week. I'm going to take it from where Angela left off, but I want to just reiterate some of the things I mentioned last week. Last week, I clarified that an unhealthy relationship is a relationship that is devoid of mutual trust and respect. It is a relationship that one party seeks to impose control and power over the other, physically, sexually, emotionally, and all that. But I think that it is important for us to distinguish between conflict and abuse. And with this, I'm going to use power, relational power skills. So what that means is that when you're talking about conflict, the 2 parties involved are struggling over power. That is called power struggle. Power is not tilted in favor of one or the other. They are both struggling at power. And that could mean people not disagreeing on some issues in the relationship. And of course, there are many issues that we disagree on in the relationship. But in addressing these disagreements, power is not tilted in favor of the other, okay? And this conflict is adaptive. When you fight fair in relationship, I think it helps to address issues because obviously we are not from the same setting, we come from different backgrounds. And so there is bound to be tension. And so it is not really unhealthy to have a certain degree of conflict, and especially where the approach to addressing this conflict is not aggressive. It is not to really beat down the other, but to say, well, we can collaboratively and respectfully deal with the issues that we are dealing with. Now, abuse is not like that. Abuse is not like that. When it comes to abuse, one is having power over the other. And the one who has power over the other is the one who is dictating the pace of the relationship. Okay? And the one who is the target of this power doesn't have a say in terms of how the relationship goes. There is so much control and there is so much maneuvering that is not in favor of the target. So it is very important for us to distinguish between these two. It is very difficult in abusive relationship to use reasonable means, so-called, to address, because one party is just unreasonable. That party who is a certain power wants everything for himself or herself. And when that happens, they will not see eye to eye with any commonsensical approach, because using common sense would mean that power is going away from them, and that is not their goal. Their goal is to use power to achieve whatever they want in the relationship. So when there is an abuse, it is very difficult to use mediation and all that to address it, because then one is disadvantaged, almost always the victim, because he or she becomes the target of that relationship. So I think that a healthy relationship is where there is mutuality of respect. And you can see that in a healthy relationship, even where there are conflicts, the way and manner, the processes that the conflict, we go through to resolve the conflict, show respect. It is not meant to do the other in. It is meant to repair whatever damage is coming to the relationship. So I think fundamentally, we need to distinguish between the two. But today, I think that what we are looking at resources, what options are there for women? But I want to address why women stay in abusive relationships as we proceed. How women stay in an abusive relationship. Of course, nobody goes into a relationship with a mindset of exiting the relationship. But once there is a pattern of abuse, remember, you are unable to go out to connect with help because you have been isolated. The abuser's goal is to isolate you from support. So you are disconnected. You are not allowed to visit friends, or friends are going to contaminate you, so to speak. You are not allowed to visit relations. And the overriding aim of that is to make sure that when you are in trouble, there is nowhere to turn to. So, and one classic example I will give is where one woman really wanted to go to the parents, and the husband indicated that no, you shouldn't go. The woman defied the rules, so to speak, and went. When she returned, everything she had in clothes had been cut into pieces. For defying His Majesty's orders, everything had been cut into pieces. So there is that control to cut you. And when you are cut from support, when you are in trouble, it is very difficult to connect with the support. So that is one of the reasons. The other is when you have battered confidence, you don't believe yourself. You think that you are the problem. You are made to believe that you are the problem. If you did everything right, if you cooked right, if you dressed right, if you cared for the children well, abuse wouldn't happen. When that happens, you look inward. You want to fix yourself because you believe that you are the problem. As long as you have your eyes on yourself, you fix the problem and you continue to stay in the abusive relationship. And of course, really, women or survivors do not exit relationship because there is real and present danger that exiting a relationship really increases the risk you are confronted with. Many who have met their untimely death, many survivors who have, or victims who have met their untimely death, have met them at the point where they exited the relationship. So the most dangerous time for a woman is when they immediately exit a relationship or make their intention clear to exit a relationship. Now, you can also be stuck in an abusive relationship where people do not believe you. Indifference from others will let you get there. You are stuck in there. And of course, Angela mentioned informal resources. What happens if you connect with informal resources, your relatives, your friends, and they don't believe your story? You are alone. And sometimes it is actually thrown in your face that nobody can do anything. Nobody can do anything because your parents may have been bribed. Your parents may have been bribed. So nothing they do will help you exit that relationship. And of course, there is also lack of material resources. You don't have what it takes to even pick a transport and go to where you want to go. So lack of material support, in other words, poverty, can really cause women to get stuck in a rather toxic, abusive relationship. Okay, so when you have no support, and lack of support also doesn't mean material things alone. Sometimes when you are blamed as a victim blaming really doesn't help a victim muster the courage to step out of an abusive relationship. Now, the most difficult are the hidden obstacles, where you begin to blame yourself, you are guilty, you are made to believe that if the relationship isn't working well, then you are at fault. Okay, and so long as you are at fault, you are not going to take any step to really do something about the relationship. So you're going to fix yourself. And the reason fixing yourself simply means you provide good food, good sex, you become a good host to visitors. And interestingly, the kind of sociocultural orientation we have, what I call the ethno-theories from our forebears, that the health of a relationship solely depends on the behavior of women. I think that is incorrect. We have a mutual responsibility to make the relationship work. So I don't want women to believe that the health of a relationship entirely depends on how well you do in a relationship. Okay, that is very important. Now, when you are married to a very famous person, your odds are high that you will get stuck in an abusive relationship because you'll be afraid that when you step out, when you come out and voice out, you'll be ruining the career of another wife, a shining star. He may be the famous pastor in town, the attorney, the judge, name them. And so it is very difficult. And when you want to really report, many people will not encourage you to report because you will be ruining their career. And of course, when you are married to a high flyer, the famous person everybody knows in town, it is very difficult for your story to be believed because outside there, everything is okay. He is wonderful, amazing, kind to many, except in his own home. You are fortunate to be married. That is what you'll be confronted with. And so your story, you will not be believed. Now, we must appreciate the fact that living is a very complex process. Living is not an event. Living is a process. And there are some stages I want to bring to the table here for discussion. Now, so long as you are minimizing the abuse, you aren't going to live. And there are many ways you minimize the abuse. You get beaten, injured, you go to the hospital, you don't tell the truth about what happened. Okay, there are injuries really that the explanation do not match. And so if medical professionals are not very trained and sensitive, they may not be able to even pick out because you are all out there to protect. You don't want to be stigmatized. So you are covering up, okay? Now, when you come to see that the relationship is abusive and you lose hope, then something will cause you to really seek hope. But so long as you are hopeful, so long as you have faith, So long as you have love in an abusive relationship, it becomes dangerous. And let me explain myself here. Love is amazing. Faith is amazing. Hope is amazing. In fact, before you even get married, you need these things to really get hooked, because the hooking process can take time. You may be going after a woman for years, for months, before they say yes. If you don't have faith, if you don't have long suffering, you may not even get a suitor. But after you've gotten a suitor and you get into an abusive relationship, love, faith, and hope become dangerous, because you are waiting for the abuser to change. You have faith that the abuser will change, and that becomes a dangerous thing for the victim, because the honors to change, as Angela indicated, rest with the abuser and not you. Now, once you begin to focus on your needs, your need for safety, then you are at a place where you are prepared to leave a relationship. Now, I want to, when you are leaving, what are some of the things that you need? What are some of the things? Because safety planning is very key in the process of exiting a relationship or even staying in an abusive relationship. Obviously, in our practice, there are cases where clearly you've seen that the dangers confronting this victim are so high, but the victim decides, I want to exercise agency. It is my home. I have toiled with this person and I'm not moving an inch. I want to go back. Well, it is your choice to go back. Our concern is for you to remain safe. So how do we facilitate that process of remaining safe? We use what we call safety planning, where collaboratively we look at how do you prevent yourself. You are in the situation. You know the situation better than any other person, and you know your spouse, the abuser more than anything else. You know the most dangerous moments in the relationship. So, for instance, it is very important if you are in an abusive relationship to first identify the battered speech and the patterns of the battered speech, and at which point that they become very aggressive. So in the conversation, you can really sense where the conversation is going and the kind of phrases, the kind of expressions that you are getting to give you an indication that no, something is likely to happen. And when you're able to detect that, you know what to do. Now, how do you protect yourself when there is a physical assault? We go through all that process. Is there a place you can run to? Is there a place you can run to? Is there some kind of arrangement you have made with your neighbors? Can your children call somebody to help? Can they run to your neighbor to signal? Who can you run to? Who can you talk to? Now, it is very important that we don't bring the children in the physical altercation. Our responsibility is to make sure that the children are safe, because already what they are observing, what they are witnessing has the same repercussion on them as they've been physically abused. Now, it is important when you are contemplating leaving a relationship to think about all the things that you need to enable you to escape. What do I need to escape? Do I need money? Do I have it? Where am I going? Do I have a place to run to? Because you do not want to step out and not know where you are going to. You have to have a plan of, step-by-step plan of how you are exiting the relationship. That is very important, and there are very important documents you have to take when you are exiting a relationship. Of course, you are not going to leave your passport there. You are not going to leave your certificates there. You are not going to leave very vital documents that are very useful for you there. You don't want to look back, because looking back is dangerous. You don't want to step out and come back, because in the process of getting back to get the things that you have left, your life will be in danger. So Who can you stay with? I think it is very important. Now, after you've exited a relationship and you are staying alone, it is very important that you take personal security very, very, very seriously. Your license system, okay, security doors, you are careful who you show, who you let into your home, because there can be agents of the abuser, and there are agents all around. You need to be very careful about that as well. Now, you need money, you need several changes of clothes, you need keys, you need medication, you need your address book. Now with smartphones around, once you take your smartphone, you know who to call, okay? And also, once you leave, definitely you're going to work. You are connected to the world of work. Who are you going to share your experiences with? Are there people you trust? Are they going to let the abuser know where you are? So these are considerations that we need to have when we are thinking about exiting and all that. Now, of course, it is very important that you take very good of your emotional health. Extremely important that you do that, because recovery is a journey. And if you are not very emotionally strong, you may not be able to go through the exit process. Okay, so I think in order not to spend more time, I will bring my conversation to a close here. And then during question time, we can address some of the issues that were proper. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ewukubekwe. That was very enlightening. And I think, thank you also for going over things from last week. These were all crucial bits of information that we need. And we have a few questions, I think, sitting around here, which we should tackle them before we move on to the next session. So, I'm not going to look at the Q&A ones yet. I'll try and pick the ones up that are here in the chat. So it says here, how is the shelter system coordinated so that an uneducated Ghanaian woman will be able to access the service? And this is for Dr. Angela.
Oh, okay, quickly. It's an interesting question because we have all kinds of people who come to the shelter. Most of them are actually not very highly educated. So it also means that you need to put in place some kind of public information system that gets the information out, and your networks are able to let people know that they can access these services. We wish we can do better than that, but the other side of it is that you also don't want to be in a position where you turn people away. So there's a fine balance to work there. Yeah, people get to know.
Okay. Thank you. I'll try and move through these a little bit swiftly. So someone says here, my fear is that sometimes people have so much faith in the pastors, and so they trust them totally. And this person has a real problem with that. Mr. Adolf Ewukubekwe, could you sort of add something to that? I mean, it's an observation that the person is making, so it's not a question. But what she's saying is that people have so much faith in the pastors, and so they trust them totally. Is this something that is this a statement that you would say you agree with?
Well, I think that, yes, respecting your pastor is good, but having faith in him. The Bible says the arm of flesh will fail you. So we are supposed to have faith in God. We respect human beings, but we have faith in God. And so how would you trust your pastor at the peril of your life? Life is very important. And so under no circumstance I would say that the respect for your pastor, the faith in your pastor should trump your life, should be way and above your life. No, I don't think anything is more valuable than your life.
you. Thank you. I think we have a time to tackle probably another one or so. So someone says here, how well our organization, the organization, are the shelter services, I think what they're trying to say here is, do people know, are women aware that these shelters exist so they don't stay in abusive relationships just because they don't have anywhere to go? So, I mean, are they advertised, these shelter services? Is this something that people know? And, I think maybe Dr. Angela, Jamina Boaje, maybe you could tell us this, seeing that you have.
Yeah, well, the issue is actually that we don't have enough of these services across the country, be they shelter services or crisis centers or so on. What we have is not enough. It's actually, even though I like to say that our organization has run the only operational shelter in Ghana for the last 22 years, it's not something to be very proud of. We should have had about at least 10 national shelters, if not more. So yes, usually we depend on our network partner, the police, the social services. They actually bring us the clients, occasionally neighbors and so on, or walk in. But that's the way in which it goes. And truly, we do need more of such services, not just shelters, but legal services and all of that enable people to be safe and to have their cases handled promptly.
Yeah.
And so on. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, and then there's sort of one last one before we move on to our next speaker. Someone says here, I know of 2 situations where ladies married to pastors were vilified, called demonic, and told to keep quiet when they mentioned that they were being abused. These 2 ladies died from depression. I'm guessing there isn't any more we can add to that. If anyone wants to say anything about that, maybe Dr. Angela Jamina Boaji. I think to read that's very sad, very, very sad. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a statement, yes, and that's not just there are people who have died from depression, from gunshot wounds, from, being hacked. When I was an attorney with the state, a lot of the homicide cases I saw were of husbands who had killed their wives, and you'd see the pictures at the back of the docket, okay? And they're not fantasy. And those are the physical, that ends in murders. How much more the ones that are subtle and silent and, going on there until you just can't even speak anymore. So yeah, abuse is debilitating, and we need to speak about it and work at it.
Yeah. Good. Well, thank you so much. Hopefully, as we go on through this, by the end of it, I think we've been saying this, if we help one person, we would have done, a good job. And hopefully people are joining in. We are now up to 213 participants. So we're not doing too badly. Okay, so our next speaker I will introduce is the Honourable, apologies, I will find my piece of paper, is the Honourable Diana Asunaba Dapa. So I'll make the introduction and then she can take the floor. So on the 25th of June 2021, Ms. Dapa was sworn into office as one of 2 deputy ministers to the Office of the Attorney General and Ministry of Justice of the Republic of Ghana by His Excellency the President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo. Until her appointment as a Deputy Attorney General and Deputy Minister for Justice, Ms. Dapa was a lecturer in law at the Ghana Institute of Management and Public Administration, GIMPA, where she taught alternative dispute resolution, ADR, corporate law and governance, public international law, and human rights law. Prior to her appointment, Ms. Dapa was a senior associate of Sam Okuchetu and Associates. Honourable, welcome. We are pleased to have you. And it's been, I have no doubt you have a busy schedule, but to show that, I suppose, the importance of this topic, We are glad that you're able to join us. So thank you. You now have the floor.
Right. Thank you very much, Samantha, for that kind introduction. Let me stand on earlier protocols and expression of appreciation given by my own senior colleague, Dr. Dramna Boaje and Mr. Adolphe Awukubekwe. I wish to put out a few things that I take consolation. My presentation will take solace from the informal, as it were, or non-legal help that have been succinctly elaborated upon by the earlier speakers. I have the responsibility to say that my presentation is limited. I have the responsibility of engaging you in this conversation on one type of help, which has attracted considerably skepticism, as I've been reading from most of the comments and most of the examples that have been given by the earlier speakers. That is the legal help. And so to set the scope very clearly, I'll be speaking on how to seek legal help in an unhealthy relationship. Of course, I say skepticism about this type of help because, as most of you have expressed, usually even family, friends would dissuade you from approaching, as it were, the legal form because of the idea that taking your partner or your spouse, as the case may be, through the legal process means that there is no coming back. But of course, I also take consolation in the expression of wisdom by now, not my senior colleague, but Pastor Dr. Angela Dramna Boaje, that even the Bible says sometimes you should flee. And so, having laid these parameters clearly, I'm very bold and not intimidated anymore to speak about how to seek legal help in an unhealthy relationship. So I'll be following this outline. I'm going to speak about the available legislation in seeking that legal help in unhealthy relationships. I'm going to talk about domestic violence, because most of the things that we've talked about since last week are described as domestic violence based on existing legislation. I'm going to talk about domestic relationship. I've seen some question come up about elderly abuse, which is also encompassed even under domestic violence. But I focus basically, because we're talking about marriages and courtship, so I focus mainly on that relationship. I'm going to engage you on the legal process, how to go about seeking legal help. And I'm going to also talk about some of the remedies available and end my presentation on the support systems. I believe most of you have asked questions bordering on shelters and etc. So I'm going to end my presentation with the available support systems. So generally, in seeking legal help, there are three general legislations that I believe each and every one of us here need to be conversant with. They're not limited to these laws, because even if you look at the Domestic Violence Act, it talks about the availability of other remedies in addition to the remedies that you may get under the Domestic Violence Act of 2007. So the general legislations that you may want to be conversant with are the Domestic Violence Act of 2007, Act 732. We also have the Criminal and Other Offences Act 1960, Act 29. These legislations are now easily accessible. You can just Google them, and then you'll be able to download the relevant laws. And we also have a very recent act, which also borders on some form of domestic violence. And so I would want to speak more about it, where people are blackmailed, they're extorted, or with a threat that their nude pictures or some recordings that they may have had in their previous relationship may be exposed. So I will also seek to talk about what are the remedies, the legal remedies available in these situations, which can also be classified as domestic violence. And so the final general legislation is the Cybersecurity Act of 2020, passed just last year, Act 1038. Now, when we talk about domestic violence, I'm talking about domestic violence because from last week, all the forms of abuses that we have talked about, economic abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, which appear to be rampant and which appear to be more known, are all come under the act as what? Domestic violence. So the abuses that have already been discussed earlier on are captured by law to be domestic violence. Now, domestic violence is defined in Act 732 as any act under Act 29. So Act 29 is basically the broader law that talks about all crimes or offenses in Ghana. Now the Domestic Violence Act says that domestic violence is any act which can be found under Act 29, but which occurs within the context of what we call a domestic relationship. Now the domestic relationship can either be previous or existing relationship. So in talking about unhealthy relationship, you may have some lagging past terrible relationship, and there are also remedies existent under Act 732. Now, domestic violence also includes specific acts or even threats to commit those acts that are likely to result in physical abuse, very common, where there is sexual abuse. And let me put out a disclaimer that most of the examples that I'll be giving are based on my own practical experience as a counsel for a victim in domestic violence. Interestingly, I have represented men more at DOFSU than I have for women. It's quite strange, but I've had to represent men as applicants for emotional abuse, and usually using children and other physical abuse against these men. So just to put out there that this DOFSU Act, as expressed by some questions, may also include not just women being the victims, but also men being the victim. So all the types of abuses that we talked about, economic abuse, sexual abuse, sometimes people are obsessed with certain lewd scenes and engage usually in pornography and would want to subject their partners to those lewd scenes, and those obsession, repeatedly can be classified as sexual abuse. Physical abuse, of course, quite explanatory. I've seen examples where a man has locked up the woman for several days, never allows the woman to attend social events, even the funeral of her own mother. That's what Mr. Ukubekwe talked. Normally, it is an attempt to cut off your social support, and then makes you the victim unable to seek help. We've also seen examples of economic abuse, where not necessarily because the wife is dependent on the man financially, but we've seen examples where there is an arrangement, for example, between the partners that I will take care of family, groceries, etc. You pay the mortgages, and then with a view to putting the woman in a state or the man in a state that is abusive, would renege on that arrangement, that promises. So you have the man possibly leaving the house unceremoniously, or stop paying the mortgage payments or rent, threaten you to leave the house to you, etc. These are some of the examples. And normally, like I think earlier speakers have expressed, usually people are unable to seek help because when they are in this situation, they're thinking about where to lay their head, they're thinking about their children, etc. I'm here to talk about how to resolve all these nagging issues or justification, as the case may be, why you may not want to seek the available help. Of course, emotional, verbal, or psychological abuse. You've had persons, your partner, previous relationship or present relationship will call you at odd hours, especially when you are not cohabiting. We've seen examples of a man calling other men that he feels that the ex partner was involved in at odd hours, visiting them, threatening them with threats, etc. These are all other examples of emotional, verbal, or psychological abuse. One of my clients told me about how the man would climb walls. She was newly married, would climb walls and peep through the windows just to see what was going, would follow her everywhere, and then came to us to find out what she could do in those situations. You have people, and that's why I go into the Cybersecurity Act. What you may have in the course of the blossoming moments have shared certain very private conversations or images or pictures, and they feel that this is now the opportunity for them to keep you in that relationship, or even if you've left them, to, as it were, blackmail you with these information. All of these examples amount to specific acts which can be called domestic violence. There's also harassment, including special harassment. There's also behavior that generally detracts from the dignity and worth of a person. I saw somebody asking about emotional abuse. Yes, emotional abuse is defined in Act 732, that's the Domestic Violence Act, as any form of conduct that makes another person feel constantly unhappy, feel miserable, humiliated, ridiculed, afraid, jittery, or depressed, or to feel inadequate or worthless. So that defines what emotional abuse is. It is not unusual, as I've noted there, it's not unusual to find that a complaint, where there's a complaint presented before the court or the police, all these types of abuses are present. So within one complaint, you have that the woman is being battered, or the man has been battered, he or she's going through emotional abuse, is going through economic abuse. So you can find all the type of abuses within one complaint. Now, domestic relationship, as I stated, domestic violence talks about all these acts which include physical abuse within a domestic relationship. Now, there's a broad meaning of domestic relationship if you look at section 2 of 732. But for the purpose of this presentation, I narrowed it down to courtship or marriage. But someone asked a question about elderly abuse, and that's why I want to talk about it, that elderly abuse may constitute domestic violence if you look at the act. It even talks about house helps, nannies who live with us. Even talks about tenants, people who are co-tenants in a compound house, as it were, or in an apartment, as the case may be. There can be domestic violence existing within the scope of this relationship, which is classified as domestic relationship. Now let's go through the legal processes, assuming that you've gone through all these abuses, you followed all the informal social help. Most of you who are skeptical are even the religious help, etc. And now you want to use the legal process. How do you go about it? So usually it goes through by the domestic violence. It's a division of the police, which we call which most of you know as DOFSU, which is the Domestic Violence Victim Support Unit. It is a division within the Ghana Police Service with well-trained police personnel who have expertise on the issue of domestic violence. So it usually starts by a complaint by a victim or a person with information about domestic violence. Now, the interesting thing about the act is that the complaint needs not arise even from the victim herself, may even arise from friends or people, neighbors within the compound who you have been constantly abused. But the challenge with that is that the rules of this game, when it comes to the legal process, the rule of this game is what? Evidence. You have a situation where caring neighbors or family, as the case may be, take this formal complaint to the police, but you have an unwilling victim who will be unwilling to, as it were, present the necessary evidence for the process to follow through. Of course, a deceased person's personal representative, we're not hoping that you wait, and this has been drummed into our ears, that we are not hoping that you wait till you die before you seek help. But of course, if the unfortunate happens, the deceased person's personal representative or even a member of the deceased family may also file the necessary complaint where the complainant or the victim is dead. Now, where do you file this police complaint? I told you it starts with the filing of a police with a complaint with DOFSU, which is a division under the Ghana Police Service. So you can file the complaint where the offender lives. You can either with the police near where the offender resides, or where the victim resides, or where the domestic violence occurred or is occurring. You probably were on a vacation, or the abuse happened within a hotel, or any other temporary place where the victim has left his or her usual abode. You can file this police complaint at any of these places. Now, usually when you file this at DOFSU, the police officer there, the DOFSU officer, we usually interview the parties and witnesses, including the children. Then the complainant is given an extract in a language that he understands to seek medical treatment, which medical treatment is supposed to be free. Of course, we've heard of current instance is led by the Coalition for Survivors and other interested groups, talking about how this free medical treatment from a state hospital has been given a different interpretation, and unfortunately so. But clearly under the scope of the law, they're supposed to obtain free medical treatment from any government hospital. And in some cases, the victim is given a place of safety as the circumstances recall. Of course, thankfully, we have organizations which I'll share with you, like the ARC Foundation. I think Dr. Dramna Boaje is here, the Peril Safe Haven. And thankfully, it's hoped that the DOFSU will complete its building, which is supposed to be a one-stop shop, and I'll talk about all of that. Upon completion, the DOFSU Center would have a place where there's a clinic, so you don't need to, what we found in practice is that people sometimes find it expensive or even unable to move from where the complaint is made to the hospital and back, and because of that, they abandon the whole process. So it is anticipated that the new unit, which is being built behind the police headquarters, so when it is completed, we'll have a one-stop shop where in fact, there's even going to be a court there, where so there's no need going back and forth. So within the same premise, you have the DOFSU unit, you have the clinics, you have the safe havens, etc. We're hoping this sees reality. And then of course, within the process of filing a complaint, the police to advise the victim to preserve evidence. Don't forget that when it comes to any legal process, the rule of the game is evidence. And also the police also have an obligation to inform the victim of his or her rights. Now, after you have sought medical help and the necessary medical reports has come, you come back to the police where they then begin the court process. Now, in talking about court here means the access court here means high court, circuit court, or district court, because we anticipate that it is not everywhere that you can find a high court or even sometimes a circuit court. So a district court also has jurisdiction to entertain any applications under Act 732. Now, usually a victim would apply to court for what we call a protection order against the respondent. And interesting, not just the respondent, but also persons associated with the respondent. So you usually have, let's say, your partner who will be abusing you with the help of his sisters or her sisters, or sometimes even using thugs, as has been the case that I have been privy to sometimes. So the application for a protection order by the court can be made not just against your spouse or your partner, but even all those persons, co-conspirators who are helping or aiding and abetting your spouse or your partner to take you through those abuses. I think I saw a question when I was going through the question, what if it's from your mother-in-law? And that's why I'm stressing this point, that the application for protection order for domestic violence is not only targeted at your spouse or partner, but all persons associated with the respondent who are aiding the respondent, which is your partner or spouse, to commit those acts that constitute domestic violence. Usually the application is made ex parte. When we say something is made ex parte, means without the presence of the other party. And usually even upon ex parte applications, the court will allow and give specific interim orders, especially when the urgency of the circumstance so determined. But usually the court would ask that the respondent, which is your partner or your spouse, should be invited and to speak to the application. If such a person refuses, then the court will go ahead to give a final order against that respondent, which is your partner or spouse. Sometimes too, in the course of a criminal proceedings, generally, maybe not even domestic violence, the judge finds that there's domestic violence involved. The judge may himself or herself issue a protection order that, look, in fact, beyond the threatening or harm, I see that this is a domestic violence issue, and so I am going to issue a protection order. I'm going to speak shortly about what the protection order entails. Now, proceedings for protection order is usually held in private. You see in the act that even there's no publication of the proceedings. It's held in private unless the courts otherwise decide. Years back, I think my senior shared with me a story of domestic violence situation where then we weren't having hearings in camera. So it was in the courtroom. In fact, the woman had discussed thorough and elaborate instances of domestic violence with us in the firm. But then when we went to court and in the full glare of the public, there was that fear or as it were, the embarrassment of talking about the things that she had gone through. And I believe that the law has resolved this matter by ensuring that proceedings in respect of domestic violence are held in camera, and also ensure that the victim's identity is also protected for obvious reasons. Sometimes even the court, in the course of hearing the application for a protection order, may make an order that the respondent, that is the accused person, should be separated from the applicant or the witnesses without sacrificing the integrity of the proceedings. Usually domestic violence applications also, and I'll make reference to those specific instances, also include that the court will require social or psychological inquiry report or both to be submitted by a social welfare officer or a clinical psychologist, as the case may be. Now, when you apply to the court for protection order, I believe that with institutions that the Legal Assistance Network, the ACT Foundation, etc., they have come up with templates that are very easy to use and adopt. So basically tell your story in the application by giving the detail, your name, your identity, the identity of the respondent, and basically just talking about what has happened to you, which fits under any of the forms of abuses. Now, the court will give protection order with a view to doing any of the following. If it is physical abuse, may make an order directed at the spouse or partner that will stop him from physically assaulting or using physical force. I'll come and answer the question, what if the court makes that order, but he or she goes ahead to still physically abuse? That clearly is contempt. And again, the whole remedy there's a general remedy for domestic violence, which is that you can be fined or imprisoned or both. And where the act is repetitive because the person has violated the order that's been given by the court, then the fine or the imprisonment is enhanced. So the court can give an order which is to prohibit the respondent, in this case your partner or your spouse, to desist from physically assaulting you, forcibly confining you or detaining you, depriving you access to adequate food, water, clothing, shelter. So make an order that he fulfills his obligation towards you and your family. And I believe that some of the practical challenges that people face in not seeking legal remedies, where they feel that what will happen to me and my children, etc. The court, if any order that is necessary to force the applicant not to renege on his obligation to provide you adequate food, water, and clothing and shelter, may be given by the court. The court may make an order that forces, restrains the spouse, your spouse or your partner from engaging in a sexual conduct. I mean, I don't know how usually these things are monitored, but they definitely are monitored when the evidence comes to the court. So depriving you or threatening you to the applicant of economic or financial resources. So anything that the court may make to prohibit your partner or spouse from engaging in that domestic violence, the court will still do. One interesting order that I like to talk about is the occupational order. And I believe most women in general have stayed in these unhealthy relationships because they're thinking, what if he sacks me? And there have been threats of, I will sack you out of this house. Yes, it is our marital property, but I'll sell it and there's nothing that you can do about it. And sometimes we've had situations where the woman is in the house and people are viewing the house, prospective purchasers are viewing the house. And these are all some of the fears that disable particularly women from seeking help. Here again, by Act 732, a court may make an order that rather ejects your spouse or partner from the home and leaves you rather to stay in the house. And it even includes in situation where the house or the apartment is a rented one, so that even a landlord cannot evict you where the court has made an occupational order against your partner or spouse, that he or she rather leaves the house and leaves it for you, the case may be. Now, within Act 732, the court can also give other remedies that seek to promote settlement by the court. And in promotion of settlement by the court, which is one of the orders that the court may give under Act 732, the court will usually will also order that both parties go through some form of counseling or psychiatric help to the accused persons where necessary. And in the case of promotion of settlement by the court will appoint a probation officer to observe and report on of the accused person to the courts. Now, beyond these protection orders, which I've talked about, so any order which is relevant, it's quite broad. The court has power to give any protection order with a view to stopping the domestic violence that the applicant may be going through. But generally, beyond these protection orders, committing domestic violence, there is a penal sanction. You can be fined or imprisoned, or for both, and particularly where you contravene a protection order that has been given. Remember, the protection order can include look, you have to provide for them, can even give an occupational order that you rather leave the house. If you violate these orders given by the court, there's also a fine or imprisonment, or both, for contravention of that order. I've talked about the other things to note in seeking legal help, that the whole process is not published. There's no publication of domestic violence proceedings except with the permission of the court. The report, even if it's allowed, shall be set in a manner to protect the identity of the victim. And when there's a default, anybody publishes or reports without the consent of the court, there's also a fine or imprisonment, or both. Now, Act 732 also says that there is nothing that stops you from also bringing civil claims against your partner or ex-partner or spouse who has committed a domestic violence against you. So, for instance, in the course of the emotional abuse or physical abuse, let's say a jealous girlfriend, ex-girlfriend batters you and then breaks your car, etc., because you've gone for other women. Now, in seeking the relevant remedies under the Domestic Violence Act, nothing stops you, particularly if that ex-girlfriend is able to pay. Usually when you sue a man of straw, you might as well give it to God, because if you sue a man or a woman of straw, there's no way you can enforce the judgment. But of course, if such a partner is one who is able to pay, nothing stops you, in addition to the application under the Domestic Violence Act, from suing her personally for the loss of your car. So the processes will be concurrent with each other. So you can also bring civil claims in addition to protection that is afforded under Act 732. Now, I wish to talk about an emerging trend under the Cybersecurity Act of 2020, Act 1038, which was the use of social media then wasn't quite prevalent in 2007 when the Domestic Violence Act was passed. But with a specific focus on cybersecurity now, some acts which are criminal, which have been criminalized by this act, are also seen to be domestic violence. So using, as I've talked about, your pictures, your nude pictures, some recordings, nude things that, though in those times when you were in a happy relationship, seemingly happy or happy relationship, you engage in, the act gives protection to these recordings, pictures, etc., so that your previous or your current partner or spouse may not use those pictures or audios or visual recordings to, as it were, blackmail you. But we've had a situation where a woman was paying 2,000 cedis monthly to a man, or suffered the risk of having her naked pictures all distributed. But of course, I'm here to announce that there are provisions for protection from such kind of blackmail and extortion from partners, etc. And you find these in, for instance, section 66, 67, and 68. And so in conclusion, I'm here to say that I do not profess to have expertise in the non-legal aspects of seeking help in an unhealthy relationship. I've only sought to explain to you the available legal help. And it all starts with the reports, usually to DOFSTU, through to getting medical help, and finally procuring a protection order or occupational order, as the case may be. Now, with the whole law set up with a view to stopping the abuses and ensuring post the abuse that there is some assistance to the support I believe, and I share in the sentiments of Dr. Jamna Boachi, that the shelters available are all private, non-governmental organizations. And of course, we know the challenges with these non-governmental organizations are funding. But of course, they've been doing a tremendous job so far. And so I've on this slide sought to share with you some contact details which will help, which is the emergency. And of course, we have to give some commendation also to DOFSU, and they've been doing some tremendous work. And I'm praying that the one-stop shop, which is gradually nearing completion, will be completed, and we can all seek the necessary legal help in getting out of unhealthy relationships. Let me thank you for this opportunity, and I hope to address any questions at this time. Thank you, sir.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you, Honorable Diana Asunaba Dapa, for availing yourself for this lecture. And we really thank you for being so detailed in going into depth. You know, I know you're very busy at this time, and you put together a very, very wonderful presentation. And so we're really, really grateful about that. I think for now, we're going to leave this slide on just so people can copy the information if needed. And we will proceed with questions. It's about 7:35 GMT. And I know we started about 5 minutes late, so not late, but we wanted people to be able to join. And so we have about 30 minutes for questions. And we're not only joined by the 3 presenters for today, we also have Dr. Jifa Atta, I see Professor Efwa Hesse, and Dr. Foster Naniwato from last week as well. So we'll get our questions rolling. There was one question from last week, which I would bring up, and I also have one from a male friend. And he says, what happens if the person who is female in this instance causing the abuse is constantly blaming or calling the spouse as the abuser, especially when the woman has some financial independence? They are not physically abusive, but they are insults, denigrate, create emotional distress, or create unnecessary conflict, or anything that you try to address with them is classified as abuse instead of dealing with simple self-responsibility issues.
Doc, is that for me, right?
Or anyone who wants to take it.
I missed you briefly.
In other words, you have 2 people who they all think they're being abused, but one person feels they're not abusive and that they're just being accused of being abusive.
Right. I mean, from my presentation, which is, again, I will stress the legal help. I would say that, I mean, that it's not unusual for what we call counter claims to be made in applications before the courts when it comes to domestic violence. So you have an issue where, you know, if you say that, or born me kwedu nam so me born a kwedu. So
you might have to go over your answer because
you are applying and in responding. So it's not unusual to find whichever one of them, be the male or the female, be the first to approach the legal process. And then eventually when it's not in court, in response, the other party can also raise what we call a counterclaim. So to also say that, no, I am rather the victim. And so at that point, it becomes the question of the evidence available, and usually with the help of available social welfare officers for the courts to make a determination. Now, the determination can go either way, that the order is only directed at one party, or that the order is directed at both parties, depending on what the evidence establishes. The abuse is from both ways or one way. Thank you.
Thank you. So Mrs. Samantha Proja and I will be alternating the questions. And there was one from last week where someone posted that she has 3 children with a man, and it looks like the man is probably living with another woman and only visits as necessary. And so the person wanted to know whether that was considered abuse and what she could do about it. We don't have the chat room from last week, but it was in the chat room from last week.
Well, from me, Adolf here, I don't think it meets the threshold for abuse. This is a conflict situation. So, man responds to the family. If he's maintaining the family, and then the welfare of children in the family are really catered for, and their welfare is not being compromised, then it would be very difficult for me to see abuse in there. It's kind of it's an arrangement that is a bit conflictual because one party is not happy with it, but I don't think we can call it abuse.
All right, thank you. And I'll give the next two questions and I'll let Mrs. Portia also, I'm in the Q&A section. And Doreen says, I didn't hear anything about finances. It can also lead to an unhealthy relationship. And Erasi said, what happens if the marriage is all about the mother-in-law?
Well, okay, Angela here. I think financial abuse was mentioned in Honorable Dapa's slides. And yes, it's one of the, it's one type of abuse, and it's taken care of under the Domestic Violence Act. It's broadly defined when you deny a spouse their earnings, or you take over what they make, or you destroy their property or property that you have joint interest in, and all of that. All of those things are economic or financial forms of abuse. So I think Honorable Dapa dealt with that. Mother-in-law, well, I think it's like the other question. It's a conflictual situation, unless, of course, it's the mother-in-law who is the agent of the abuse, and the mother-in-law comes in there to actually abuse you. Then it is clearly an abusive situation. But if it's really a mother-in-law being manipulative and controlling their child and all of that, it's a situation that needs to be resolved. It's a conflict that needs to be resolved. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I'd like to mention that the very Reverend Ama Afoble is also with us. She's also one of our panelists. So I'll hand over to Samantha to take a few more of the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ayi. So there's one question here. Someone says, do we have professional trauma counselors in Ghana? What type of professional counselor does an abused spouse seek help from? Do we have specialists who just deal with marriage breakups, etc.? And I think I can ask that of maybe Dr. Angela Jamina Abuaji.
Oh, Adolf is a trauma counselor.
Right.
So we have one right there.
Excellent. Go for it.
Yeah.
So Adolf, would you like me to ask the question again?
Well,
essentially what you're saying is that we've answered it, that we do have one. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, okay. But I think that have we answered this, where it says, what type of professional counselor does an abused spouse seek help from? So apart from you, Mr. Adolf Ehuku Bekwe, are there others like yourselves, and where could people be able to find?
Well, thankfully, at the regional hospitals, you find clinical psychologists there who may be able to help. Yes, and if they are not in a position to deal with a particular issue you are addressing, then they may refer you. But there is help at the regional centers. If you go to RAGE, there is a clinical psychology. All the regional hospitals in the country have clinical psychologists. And of course, there are some also in private practice.
All right. Yes, okay. And I can see that Dr. Foster has also put a whole load of locations in the chat. So please refer to that. There are about, I think he's put about 10 of them in different regions across What we'll do with these is we will create a sheet for this, which we will put up again next week, where this information will be clearer for those of you that need it. The other question I'm going to ask as well is, someone says here, do we have any women refugees in Ghana? I think we've said that, but are they safe so they're not easily located? And that's a question. And I mean, if I might ask Dr. Jamina Abuaji, seeing that you're a director for the ARC Foundation, the question is, you know, do we have more of these women refugees? And most importantly, for these women that have got away or thinking about getting away, is it safe for them so that it's not located?
Okay, so quickly, there's you see on the screen that there's a slide or a flyer. There's Pearl Safe Haven, which has come up this year. I know that the Domestic Violence Secretariat of the Ministry of Gender is also coming up with a shelter very soon. And then when the Dofsu One-Stop Center happens, there will be it will be very temporary because it's a public space. It's a public place. You can't run a shelter there. Actually, you can only put people there under, you know, probably police supervision and then take them to a long-term shelter. Yes, we do our very best to keep our shelter, and I can talk about ours, confidential. It's not in a secret place, but most people do not know where it is, unless you're a very close network partner, a professional partner like the police, social services, you won't know where the shelter is. And thankfully, it has been so for the last 22 years. That's what we do, we try. That's the best way I can answer it, yes. We keep them safe. And there's 24-hour protection also,
okay.
Security.
Right, I just one more question, which I should have linked in with my previous one, and then I'll hand over to Dr. Ayi. The person says here, the most dangerous time for an abused woman is the point of leaving or when they've left. Safety planning is very important. So how does one access that, or which organization to help? Am I thinking that for this, I'm throwing these questions out there, but I kind of know that we've answered them, but it's for the person who's asked it to know that we've answered this. With the previous slide we had up with all that details, that should be sufficient or not? Mr. Wukubakwe, would you say that any of those organizations can help somebody? Because you spoke quite specifically about the time when the person needs to leave is the most dangerous time. When you make that decision. So
yes, gender-based violence service is a specialized area, and so we are all getting exposed and building capacity in this area. So both professionals and lay people need more training in that area. We have quite a few who are very experienced in that area. So training is ongoing, of course. The good thing is that even the police are training some basic counseling skills. And so when a police officer is talking to you, the police officer is exposed to safety planning. And I think it is very important that for all responders, all professionals responding to GBV, to have some basic knowledge of safety planning. If you are not competent in how to engage a survivor regarding safety planning, then you must go back to the drawing board and get yourself trained. It is extremely very, very important. And of course, I wouldn't sit here and vouch for everyone who holds himself or herself out there as an expert in this area. So, of course, you go to doctors, they know where to refer you to. You go to the psychiatric hospitals, you are likely to get professional help from there. So, and of course, there are civil society organizations at WISE, at the App Foundation shelter. There is some network. So once you get into it, you're likely to be referred to who can be of help to you.
Thank you. I'll hand back to Dr. Ayi to take the next few questions. Thank you.
And thank you. And maybe this is a follow-up question. So if somebody goes to any of these, callable psychiatric units, LECMA hospital, do they just show up and say, I have a domestic issue question? I mean, will the receptionist know how and where to direct them? And is there no stigma attached to it?
Well, I think that once you go there and you want to see the psychologist at any of the regional hospitals, LECMA included, they will help. But once again, stigma is real, okay? Because as I indicated early on, I can vouch for all professionals being very sensitive to what we are dealing with. Training is extremely important. Training and retraining is very important. And so we are still in the process. I wouldn't say we have a full house of professionals who are skillful in what we are talking about, but training is ongoing. Unfortunately, I think I will have to link this to a question I have seen there. Does government offer support to organizations who work in this area? I think that is a very important question. And the answer is simple. For civil society organizations working in this area, no government support. That is it. No government support.
So it sounds like the Mental Health Authority needs to put in more effort into maybe getting government funds to establish or to support some of these organizations. Well,
there is under the domestic, and I think Honorable Deputy Attorney General will address that. Under the Domestic Violence Act, there is a fund that has been created. A fund has been set up. In fact, we have a board, Victims of Domestic Violence Management Board, that is supposed to oversee all policy and even practice issues regarding domestic violence in this country. As we speak, it is in the process of being set up. It is not up and running because of the transition that we've gone through. The fund is being set up, but it will shock everybody to see how much money do we have in the fund. We don't have much money in the fund, and I don't think in a year the fund can support all activities on GBV in this country. So there is a bigger question that we have to address. Now, is GBV, is domestic violence real in this country? And I think everybody on this panel will attest to the fact that it is real, it is here. The statistics attest to that fact. Now, so if it is a real issue, a present danger we are contending with, what must we do as a nation to address it? And I think that we must put our money where our mouth is. In other words, the center must do something about resourcing GBV operators. DOPSU must be supported. Yes, I mean, I don't within the Ghana Police Service, what money come to DOPSU is negligible. They have a ring-fence funding that goes to DOPSU. And you see DOPSU officers having to take money out of their pocket to feed children who are seeking service. They have to even sometimes use their own vehicle. And so they are willing to do the work, but the resources to do the work isn't there. And they are trying their best to do that. So as a society, I mean, I want to say this webinar is a call to action. And there are very resourceful people who have convened here. And I think that it is important that we table this as a critical issue, a national issue demanding urgent action.
Very right. I agree with you. And now that we have Honorable Dana Dapa as part of this and assuming office, maybe we would ask her a part of our call to action to prioritize this area as one of her, priority areas that she'll tackle for her term of office. Honorable, is that something that you can do for women?
Right. Doug, I think just even before that, I saw a question about, the fund, the supposed free medical treatments, which is true. In fact, I joined a group of people before my appointment called the Coalition for Survivors, where we spoke vehemently about this. Now, if you look at the sources of funding for domestic violence, I like the way Mr. Ukubekwe puts it, we should put our monies where our mouth is. It should be a priority for us as a nation, because clearly it talks about monies for the fund, which is the domestic violence fund coming in from voluntary contribution. Of course, you cannot rely on voluntary contribution, but if you look at B and C, it talks about monies approved by Parliament for payments into the fund. And so it becomes an issue of how serious as a nation do we take issues of domestic violence, and how much are we willing to put in by our representatives, the members of Parliament, to approve as payment into the fund to support domestic violence. And clearly it talks about monies from any other source approved by the minister responsible for financing. These are the three limited sources of funding for this. And so for me, mine clearly, beyond even me as a person or even as a ministry, it's for us also to urge upon our Parliament to make this perhaps a priority. And that's the question that Mr. Ukubekwe succinctly put it. Is domestic violence an issue in Ghana? Is this something that as a country, as a people, we are willing to prioritize and put in funding, considerable funding, to ensure that? And so I think that will be my reaction to this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I have a quick one here. It says, mediation can actually be another means, and I think this is off of when Dr. Jamina had spoken. Jamina Boaje says, seek mediation on one of her slides, and the person is saying that mediation can actually be another means of continuing the abuse. What if the abuser will use it as an opportunity to put the other person down, or threatens that when we go for mediation, I'm going to spell out XYZ that you have also done, so that it becomes a vicious cycle?
Well, what the person is saying is true to the extent that we come from a very victim-blaming culture. That's one. Two, you see, we are actually addressing the issue of unhealthy relationships, and I try to show that there's a sort of a continuum. The things that you do that make your relationships unhealthy sometimes, and those things can be resolved by many ways: arbitration, mediation, counseling, talking through all of those things. But it is when you see that pattern that you need to understand that you are in a toxic, abusive situation, and often those other kinds of approaches do not work. If they would work, then they must have strong accountability aspects, where the perpetrator, the abuser, is being held accountable, whether by the families or by the formal system or whatever there is. If that accountability is not there, then it is likely to continue. So while I say that I don't like to promote mediation, arbitration, and so on when there is violence, we can't run away from the fact that in our society, people will start from those places. They won't go directly to the police. Sometimes it happens for a long time before they would even approach a formal agency. People would want to speak to the family, speak to a respected person, speak to a trusted pastor, and so on. Question is, are those people who are going to engage in those processes sensitive enough to the issues? Do they understand the dynamics of such abuse? Do they understand the power dynamics? Can they hold that person responsible and make them accountable for their behavior, and therefore their behavior, their commitment to change? I have seen cases resolved that way because somebody held another person accountable and went through that process, and they were able to resolve that. Even at the police, When Waju started, that's the DOS now. It used to be headed by a woman that we all respect. Her name is Mrs. Giftianin. And just by reason of the approaches she would choose as a police officer, you would end up sitting down and going through why your behavior is criminal, what can happen to you, why she would put you in and ask the person you're abusing to come and bail you, so you have to contend with that person. Her kind of approaches led to many issues being resolved because she would bring in that accountability aspect of it very strongly. That's where we lose it. So you may approach a formal institution, okay, but if the people sitting there do not understand the dynamics, nor willing to approach it from the accountability issues and keeping the person who is being victimized safe, then you are not going anywhere. So that's why I'm saying that these things will be used, but we need to understand how they are used and who is using them and what they know.
Thank you. Unless someone wants to add something, the next question says, this program is great. I hope 50% of attendees are men. I feel a solution to the problem is men and boys. How do we continuously transform the hearts of men and boys? How are we raising boys so that they don't feel entitled, and also to develop servant leadership hearts? How can we raise men so that they understand the purpose of a wife? Because if you don't know the purpose of a wife, you're more likely to abuse her. Churches need to increase their programs and support for men and boys, and churches always have programs for women. Men need reflective spaces, and some are victims of violence.
Good. Is someone, sorry, Dr. Bertha, are we, so is this a sentence you need confirmed?
I think they wanted to know what supports there were for also encouraging men to be responsible partners and not become abusive.
I think there is an
Yeah.
answer to that question. I mean, someone talking about raising our boys, but I would say raising both boys and girls. As I mentioned, I don't know if it is by sheer coincidence or my destiny, but I've had to represent men more at DOFSU than I have had to represent. So I believe it's training the younger generation in how to respect each other in relationships. And just, I mean, add to the person who says that men are also victims. But I can share with you my own experience. And usually what is typical is you have where the man has what we call baby mamas, and the man possibly moves on to another relationship, and you see that the children are being used as bait or as punishment for the men. There's no access to the men. And usually you also have women physically and verbally abusing men where possibly they've moved on or even in an existing relationship. So just, and both times that I've had, you see the woman preventing the man from having access or sharing some bonding or exercising his parental rights over the children. I've seen situations where we're handling the case, and before you could say Jack, the woman had traveled outside the jurisdiction with both children. So clearly, yes, men also do suffer abuse, and I'm happy that there's been a suggestion that I think we need to, beyond being reactionary, perhaps be proactive in ensuring that our younger generation come up with a better view of relationships. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And
I agree 100% with Honorable that men too suffer a form of abuse. But I think we need to put it in a context. It's very important that we do that, because even in the case of victimization, men have more options. I'm not surprised that you have represented more men that female, because they can afford to hire a lawyer. Women, when they are victimized, do not have the control over resources, and so their options are very limited. And so that is where we must have a gender lens. We must bring, a gender lens, gender perspective to really analyzing the issue, to realize that, yes, men are victimized, and we need to hold whoever their perpetrators are accountable, be it men or women. But in so doing, we need to be very sensitive. We need to come from some appreciation of the difficulties that women go through, which is historical. If there is a systematic discrimination against women, no doubt about that, that constricts their options. And if we are sensitive and providing empowered options, then we would really also bring that to the table and create opportunities for women in that respect. Men definitely must be at the table for all of this too, because whilst you are advising the, as they say in our language, it takes two, men and women, to make this thing happen. And there is an interesting way that while everybody educates women as to how to be a good woman, role models for men are very few, and you can find that. We learn what it takes to be good husbands from the streets and from here. Meanwhile, every elderly woman is a counselor, so to speak, to another woman. So they have more access to observational learning. They learn from people. So yes, we need to bring in the men, but we need to, as a society, also begin to change the cultural norms that fuel this. Why have we elevated marriage to a position of God? It is very important that we do that, but why do we look so down upon people who are not married? Why must we make marriage a precondition for certain offices? It may not be written in books, but you have to check yourself that even when you are going to stand for a public office, nobody will tell you that check your level. Okay, so it makes it difficult for women. Yes, men too go through that experience, and I think that for me, we need to encourage men. We need to also train our boys to be more respectful of women and to not have a sense of entitlement. I don't think we should breed more of the comforter goodies. No. And Angela knows what I mean by comforter goodies. That women, when you have a presidential candidate openly saying on national TV that women are for the comfort of men. I don't think we need that kind of men with that kind of psychology and orientation. And it boils down to us having a national agenda to say that domestic violence is a problem in this country. These are the drivers of this menace, and this is how, as a society, we're going to address it.
Right.
Thank you. There are two sensitive questions I'll bring up, and then if Samantha has any others, I would also share them. One says that, he says that when you have a situation where the man is more interested, how do you deal with a spouse who is more interested in taking care of his mother and sisters financially than catering for his nuclear family? Is this a form of abuse, please? And how can it be made to stop? It means they feel a strong sense of attachment to their family. And then another one says, in the family of household relationships, what protections are there for female house helps who are being sexually abused by their male bosses, and the powerless gatesmen and drivers who are sexually molested by their madams? Where can these powerless members of the family go for help?
Okay, so quickly, the last one, I think the same laws, if they are minded to seek help, the same institutions, the same laws apply to these situations. The Domestic Violence Act is one of those very interesting, innovative acts. Ghana is good at making laws, no doubt, we cross our T's and dot our I's, and we covered everybody, including the house helps and the security officers and all of that. The question comes to the issue of putting your mouth where what's that expression? Your money where your mouth is. The commitment to put in the funding to make sure that we are engaging, in preventive actions of mass education, in provision of services, in protective, the enforcement of the protection orders and all of those things. So it's the same thing that covers them, as long as they enter into a system and they're able to get the referrals and the help and so on. But yeah, it's limited, but it's there. Somebody is attached to their family. Again, that's one of those conflictual situations that need to be resolved through the different ways that we have already laid down. If they are not taking care of their family, their nuclear family or their immediate family, that is both a criminal offense. It's called the necessaries of life, depriving people of the necessaries of life. It's criminal, and it's also civil, where people can apply for maintenance for the children and so on and so forth. So if they are not taking care of their family, their immediate family, that's a problem. But if they are attached to the rest of their family and, not so attached financially, I think it's one of those things that you find ways to speak about, to resolve, try to do something about it.
Right.
I
Thank
think
you.
say your last question, but the questions keep popping up. I mean, we have to stop at some point, but these sounded pertinent. Somebody's asking, does the Cybersecurity Act take into account the recording of telephone conversations and the use of hidden cameras, which the abuser then shares to humiliate their spouse? So for example, if there's two people having a discussion or conflict and one person is actively recording the conversation, does that Cybersecurity Act cover that? And one from the chat and also one from the Q&A is asking that shouldn't healthy relationships be included in curriculum development for high schools, like if it's Wesley Girls or Holy Child or any school, instead of waiting till people are in their 40s and 50s, shouldn't we be encouraging healthy relationships as part of curriculum development?
Right. So I think in answer to the cybersecurity question, yes, it does. And it looks at various forms of using the cyberspace to, as it were, harass, humiliate, or blackmail or extort from persons. And clearly you can specifically look at section 67 and 68, where it criminalizes threatening to use or in fact using these recorded pictures or conversations with a view to harass or humiliate persons, which is clearly covered. I just wanted to also add a bit to the sexual harassment question, which I thankfully had it coming from one Maxwell of Fusuhine. So to say that now the Domestic Violence Act works in a relationship with the Criminal and Other Offences Act in a way that where the offense committed, even though committed within a domestic relationship and so clearly classified as domestic violence, is one which, if under the law, which is Act 29, the Criminal and Other Offences, exceeds 3 years or is aggravated in nature, then of course the punishment for that offense is taken not from the Domestic Violence Act, but from Act 29. Clearly, as Dr. rightly established, so sexual abuses, of course, those offenses, rape, etc., are felonies and go beyond mere misdemeanors, which is what the Domestic Violence Act covers. Thank you.
So there's lots and lots of questions, but I think we'll have to end at some point. The last one says, are there any plans to educate pastors and imams that they are not professional marriage counselors? And what should religious institutions do to help set up or hire professional counselors to assist victims?
I'll take that. I think that, in fact, it would be dangerous not to involve them in the training and the sensitization. Whether we like it or yes, people would use the services of pastors and imams, and it's going to continue for a very long time in Ghana. God is in the public space. You can't take him out. So it is better to train them. And I tell you that those who have received training do well. Before I became trained as a lawyer in domestic violence, if anybody came to me and I was listening to their case, I'm thinking about what act applies, which clause of which section of which law. That's not helpful. That comes at the bottom when you have tried to make them safe, you've tried to bring them back to their, try to bring them on a path of healing. So if we don't train those that we would go to first, then we are all in bigger trouble. I'd rather we train them than to say, let's get the professionals. The professionals will come in at a certain point in the line of help. But if you don't train these ones, we are in bigger trouble.
Right. In fact, I share the same opinion. I've been noted for, having this very radical opinion about, the role, the substantial role that these marriage counselors and religious groups, and I share an arguable point that they are the substantial cause of these unhealthy relationships. And I'm happy that Dr. Dramnabwa, I said it's arguable, but I'm happy that Dr. Dramnabwa talks about this. And these are areas that we need to look at, because clearly some of the counseling and pre-marriage counseling sessions, some of the arguments, some of the advices supposedly that are given are clearly in violation of a number of laws that we have in this country. So I'm happy you raised that up. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Samantha, do you see any questions that need to be asked?
Yes, I feel if we don't, because we really are running out of time, but this, I thought we maybe, I don't know if we tackled or not, it was about children. What about the children you may be leaving behind? There are complications about emotional attachment to children, etc. Could you please address that? The resources for looking after children is most people, women and men, is the big problem in leaving abusive relationships of any kind. And I think someone else is, just to add to that, they've said, many cases of domestic abuse, is it not the case that the children are always abused physically as well? So can someone just, I'm not quite sure who's going to volunteer to tackle that, and that probably will be the last thing that we talk about.
Right. And perhaps I will attempt that. When it comes to children, I've always advised clients in these domestic violence and even divorce matters, there's only one determining factor. It is what is in the best interest of the child. In fact, I tend to tell my clients and even the opposing sides that it is usually not even what the parents want, but in such environment, it becomes what is in the best interest of the child. In fact, I've had to defend the respondents where in such situation was actually the grandparents now asking to be the custodians of the children. And so, it's a very holistic view that the court takes in doing what is in the best interest of the child. In this situation, it is only that will augur in the best interest of the children. If it's taken away from both parents or one, or the court will look at all the evidence presented to determine what is in the best interest based on the Children's Act of 1998, Act 560. Thank you.
Well, all too soon, we have come to the end of our program. I want to thank the over 200 and something people who joined us on Zoom and about the 19 people who watched on our YouTube channel. This has been extremely informative. I can't thank the presenters enough. They had a rehearsal yesterday. They've been preparing all week. We keep demanding more and more of their time and resources because we really needed this information. So I want to thank all of them, and I want to thank the webinar committee. I can't mention all their names, but you all know yourselves for really availing yourselves and helping to plan this conference or webinar series. Irabna Akumi, Gifty Emisa, Mrs. Amma Engman, all of you, Dr. Hannah Aite, Miss, Beatrice Anowa Brew, and all of you. If I missed any names, please forgive me. And we thank the OG as well. Please join us next week. We're going to be talking about, so all these places we talked about, going to seek help. What should you expect in counseling? What would Christian counseling focus on? What about psychotherapy? What is it? What are you healing from? What are the goals of healing at this time in a person's life? What are the first steps to take towards healing? Who and what are the likely supports around a person in recovery? And so we have a wonderful panel lined up, including Professor Ifo Hesse, Professor Angela Foriata, and Dr. Jifa Atta, and we'll have all our panelists here as well. So kindly join us next week. And I'm going to kindly ask the panelists after we end to rejoin for just a very, very short time for debriefing. I know you've all spent a lot of time already, but just to see how things went. And so to all of you who joined and gave very kind comments, we appreciate it. We'll be ending the webinar at this time. Thank you once again. This has been Dr. Bertha Ayi. I was co-moderating with Mrs. Samantha Projer. And see you same time next week, 6 p.m. GMT on Sunday, June 25th. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and last week I was asked to ask if the speakers have one last thing they would like to, one closing comment.
Thank you.
It's okay with me.
All right, thank you.
All right.